to item 4 on the agenda for the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is the Council performance against its commitments for the year 2021 to 2022. I will now ask the Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change to present the report. I will then call upon members who indicate they wish to speak by clicking on the raise hand icon in turn. Thank you. Carys.
Many thanks, Chair. I'm happy to present this report this morning. If I may, Chair, just very quickly before they do that, I wonder whether I could take the opportunity to thank, well, to wish Wanda Kirby actually the best for the future. I don't know whether members are aware, but Wanda is leaving the authority now within the next couple of weeks. Hannah's done a lot of work to pull these performance reports together, not only today, but over the last few years, and has done a lot of work and an excellent job. So if you wouldn't mind, Chair, I was just going to thank her and wish her all the best, really.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll all echo those sentiments, Carys, and please do pass on our best wishes to Wanda.
I will do. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report today is to provide committee with an overview of the Council's performance for the financial year 2021-22. So the report compares performance against the commitments that we made to deliver against the wellbeing objectives in the corporate plan for 2018-23, which was reviewed for the 21-22 year. So the corporate plan includes 32 commitments to deliver our wellbeing objectives, and 53 indicators are set out in the plan. Today's report provides for you an analysis of the performance against the corporate plan indicators up until the end of March 2022, and these are detailed for you in appendices A to D of today's report. Just in summary, of the 36 indicators that can be measured against a target, 24 are reported as either on target or exceeding target for last year. 6 are reported as within 10% of their target, while 6 have missed their target set for the last year. We have also measured the CPA indicators, and where these can be measured against the target, 64.7% are either on target or exceeded their target. 15.7% are within 10% of their target, and 19.6% have missed their target. So as you can see, Chair, there is a lot of detail in the appendices A to D, and I don't know whether you have any questions at this stage or whether you'd like to look at the individual reports for each directorate.
Thank you very much, Carys. I'll invite members to provide some comments on the narrative or any general comments which they'd like to make. And then, yes, I think we ought to go through each directorate and each appendix as you suggest. So I'll call Councillor Simon Griffiths first, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start by saying that the framework itself, I think, is very thorough and very competently put together. But I think going through the overall framework, I'm concerned more by the things that it doesn't measure than the things that it actually does measure. I note that in 2019, the Welsh Government declared a climate emergency, and yet the number of measures we have in here that actually drives our organisation to respond to that climate emergency are very few, and those that are there really don't have any measures against them. I think the second point I want to make is that we clearly have a major challenge at the moment within our workforce in terms of staffing levels, open posts, and the part of the framework which looks at our employees doesn't really give any information about vacancies, about headcount, about targets, and also the section around employee engagement really doesn't map onto engagement at all. It's how many people filled in a survey, and it doesn't look at the actual responses of that survey, and the other aspects of employee engagement are around apprenticeships and not about lifelong learning. And I think the third part that concerns me is that we know that we have residents at the moment that have significant challenges with BCBC in the quality of the service that it produces, but there are also very few measures in there that measure customer satisfaction, as you might call it in a commercial organisation, or resident satisfaction. So I think I just counted them. I have 39 separate points that I won't put together to everybody at this point in time, because I think I don't want to dominate the conversation. But with your permission, Alex, may I suggest that I put those out in a written response, that I know this is possibly stepping outside the normal scrutiny process, but given the time constraints and given that the importance of the process that we're going through at the moment to redefine both our corporate plan and the measures against that corporate plan over the next few months, that is essential that we get as much input from councillors into that process as possible. So what I would like to suggest is that I submit those specific points in respect of a written answer. But I think the key point that I would like to ask Caris is as representatives of our residents, how can we bring in the things that we understand that the residents want to be able to see our council doing? How can we reflect those in our KPIs? As to my view at the moment, I don't believe they are being properly reflected at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. And as a rider to that, before I bring Caris in, or perhaps another officer, it may be worthwhile an officer describing how we're going to redesign the self-assessment process, which the corporation, which the organisation is going to go through in the future. So can I invite an officer to respond to Councillor Griffiths?
I'm happy to respond on that. Oh,
Councillor
sorry,
Spanswick, would you like to come in first, or no? Councillor Spanswick has gone, so Caris, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I mean, firstly, I would just say I think the issues that Councillor Griffiths has raised are very valid. I mean, I guess very quickly, obviously, we're measuring against last year's plans. We are this year going to be redrafting our corporate plan. And I think that's obviously the ideal time to make sure that we are covering some of these issues which have become larger, I suppose, since the original corporate plan was written. Although having said that, that is updated on an annual basis. But certainly, you know, the issues that we're currently seeing now, more around climate emergency, more around cost of living and pressures for individuals living in Bridgend, I would suggest will take a stronger place within the corporate plan that we're going to write for next year. And certainly there is a key role for members, I suppose, picking up on the last point that Councillor Griffiths raised about how do we make sure that what we monitor is what people in Bridgend really want to see made a change. And that's a key way, I think, that elected members can input into the corporate plan as we rewrite it for next year. Just on the issues that you've raised, I mean, I think we've raised it in a number of different issues, and it was certainly touched on in some of the member induction training that's been held in the last month or so around the performance issues. We are reviewing the way in which we measure our performance and taking into account a lot wider issues in that process. Therefore, and we're looking at the way in which we do that now, ready really to roll it out as soon as we can. So we are doing a self-assessment now, the first one that we've done, and that will actually be subject to engagement. In other words, we will do a self-assessment and put it out for members, but also for people in Bridgend to comment on as to whether or not they think that assessment really does reflect what they think of Bridgend with regards to the services it's providing and how well they're providing it. And this year will be the first year, but we will develop on that. So I think it will change as well, therefore, the way we present information to members as well. And picking up on Councillor Griffiths' point, I think it's absolutely valid about making sure that all of the reports we bring to you are pulled together in some way, so that our performance report includes the reference to, for instance, the financial issues that we've just spent some time discussing, because obviously that impacts on the council's performance. And the other key string, which you rightly mentioned, was around our workforce and the issues that we have there. Again, they impact on our performance. So we will look at ways in which we can bring those strands together so that as members you have an overview of all of them and exactly how they're all impacting on our performance at any one time. I hope that helps. Does it, Councillor Griffiths?
If I may respond, Alex, very briefly. Yes, thank you, Caris. That's very positive, I think. And I think that there is a process that I think we as councillors would be very keen to support you as officers in defining those measures and the KPIs. I think the other thing that I think is very relevant is the the Future Generation Commissioners, 52 recommendations for local authorities. Those published back in March, I believe. And I think there's a lot of good guidance in there. And many of it does touch on what could be potential KPIs for Bridgend as well. So I would encourage officers to use that document as a guideline in when they're trying to develop some of these new commitments and also the new KPIs to go with them.
Okay, thank you, Caris, and thank you, Councillor Griffiths, for your contributions there. Councillor Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in and say I think Councillor Griffiths raised a really good point there, actually, about the KPIs and how we're monitoring that and how the public get to see those are monitored as well. And as one of the chairs of the scrutiny, I just wanted to note that we're dealing with the new self-assessment reports that are coming in, and those are new as of now. So I would suggest that rather than us as chairs of scrutiny start putting in place KPIs on our forward work plan, if we were to give a 1 quarter bedding in period for the self-assessment reports to come in, and then we take a view on how we then put our KPIs in place in light of how those have come in and how we're seeing those work.
As far as I can gather, Councillor Bledsoe, I think that is the intention. I know the Chief Executive has previously said that he would like scrutiny to play more of a role in assessing the corporate performance of the organisation in its different directorates, and also that the self-assessment reports, which we as scrutiny chairs would have been party to earlier this week, will be presented to Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee at some point, after which we could decide to do some deep dives into areas of public policy which may cause us some concerns. So what I think has been suggested by scrutiny officers, and which I agree with, is that we potentially keep our powder dry for now, have that initial report, and then assess exactly where to go from there regarding our forward work programmes if members are content with that process.
Agreed, I'm happy with that as well.
Okay, does anyone else have anything on the overall narrative of the report before we consider the appendices? I think Councillor Griffiths has got a legacy hand up, maybe, unless he wants to come back in. Councillor Griffiths?
Yes, if I may. So I did suggest the idea of a written response from myself to just hogging all the time. Is that possible approach? If you could confirm that, Chair.
I don't see why not, unless anyone else has any objection from the scrutiny team or Kelly as the monitoring officer. I'm sure that can be circulated, which I'm sure that would be appropriate.
Okay, many thanks, Chair.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to consider Appendix A then, and that is the Chief Executive's Directorate. There is some narrative on the corporate risks and directorate risks, the implications on service performance, workforce issues, procurement issues, and asset management implications. So before we go to the overall performance judgment on commitments and performance indicators, are there any questions on the overall narrative from this particular directorate? I've got a couple of things just to say before we move on to the dashboard. I just want to underline what the leader and deputy leader and others have said regarding new legislation which puts additional pressure on service demand, and that it's absolutely crucial that consequential funding from central government follows any new legislative pressures. Also, under the narrative, it says that careful prioritisation will be necessary. So, and it also says that areas may suffer. So, can the leader or a member of the cabinet outline what are their immediate priorities and what areas are they prepared to allow to suffer? Because that is what has been. That is the language which has been used within the narrative in this particular directorate. Leader? Deputy Leader? Any Cabinet member? Deputy Leader?
Hi, Chair. Could you just reframe your question for me, because I'm not sure which bits you're on about, because statutorily we have to deliver services, so there are some that we don't have any choice.
Cool.
It wouldn't matter if we overspend on a budget, so
No, it's just
could you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, of course I could, yeah. On page 38 of our packs, I'm afraid there isn't any number on it, but it's under the implications of financial reductions on service performance within the Chief Executive's Directorate. There is a phrase at the end of that paragraph which says, careful prioritisation will be necessary to ensure the areas the Council wants to focus on are, as far as is possible, protected from further financial cuts, but recognising it is inevitable that other areas will suffer as a result unless the settlement improves significantly for next year and beyond. So, as I mentioned, it's going to be absolutely key that we get a good settlement from both Westminster, as you have accurately said, and which I support, and as a consequential Welsh Government, which provides the local government settlement. But if that doesn't follow, what careful prioritisation have you considered as a cabinet, and what areas are you considering on allowing to suffer? That's the wording within the
I don't intend
document.
for any of us. So for me, I don't intend for any of our service provision to suffer. I will continue to lobby and demand fair funding for us as an authority. Like the leader referenced earlier, and I'm not even sure that the leader's still on the call, just of note. Like the leader referenced earlier, our non-statutory provision actually saves us money long term. So we need to continue in the vein that we're doing. I think once we have some indication about where our funding will be, I think that's the time to have those conversations. I certainly wouldn't want to determine them at this point because we don't know where we are. And I'd also suggest, I mean, we keep talking about the MTFS, you know, from a personal perspective. So this isn't a political viewpoint. This is an actual personal perspective. Being a local government worker for many, many years, actually, we're talking about cuts to services. You know, that we cannot afford to do that. If we want to protect our residents, we cannot afford to cut our services anymore. It's been absolutely dire, and people keep referencing 10 years. It's actually been 12 years now. I was in a meeting this morning where one of our public service workforce, they've actually had a detriment of 40% to their value of their salary each year. Now, that's not an acceptable position to be in. We've talked about the extra additional cost to commission provision. Councillor Williams, actually that goes for our workforce as well, and they're our biggest resource in the authority and they're our biggest cost. So I am determined that they will not suffer as a consequence of this. I think that's really, really important, and we will do what we need to do to protect our residents and our workforce. So I hope that helps answer some of that.
Thanks very much for your response, Deputy Leader. Okay, we move on to the dashboard unless anyone else has any commentary on the narrative. So we'll go to its page 40, I believe, in our packs. I apologise for others who've got different papers, but we'll take on Councillor Griffiths' point with regards to papers in future. So this is WB 01, supporting a successful sustainable economy. WB 02, helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient. And then the performance indicators on homelessness, households, empty properties, and the disabled facilities grant. And then the smarter use of resources, WB 03, that is organisational and cultural change and our staffing and workforce, and the planned reductions in the Chief Executive's Directorate. So if anyone has any comments on that, Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much. I've got a number of questions on this. Thanks. Starting with page 41. The bottom of page 40 seems a bit at odds at the one at the top of 41 with regards to, let me just put it back up, sorry. With regards to homelessness, we seem to be doing markedly better with regards to the percentage of people presented as homelessness or potentially homelessness for who the local authority has a final legal duty. But I wondered, this is a percentage, what are these in figures of actual people? Because it's not 19.2% of our whole, all the residents in the borough. What are these as people? And then why, if that's green and we're doing well there, and we're not doing well in the next one, percentage of households threatened with homelessness successfully prevented from becoming homeless, and that's 30.5%. when we should be performing at 60%. And why have we set these 30 and 60%? Because surely we don't want anyone to be homeless. So that's my first question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Caris.
I would say, if it's all right with you, Chair, could I ask Martin Morgans to come on and answer some of those questions around homelessness, please? I know Martin is in the meeting.
Absolutely. Good morning, Martin.
Morning, Chair. For the purpose of the recording, my name is Martin Morgans, Head of Partnerships. Thank you, Councillor Amanda Williams, in terms of the questions. So I'll just refer to specifically talking around DOPS 39 and PAM 012. So it's quite an intriguing sort of set of markers. PAM 012 is Welsh Government's sort of national indicator, which we monitor ourselves on. And you rightly say that that's in red and going down. So what we've seen during the pandemic is the Welsh legislation government change in terms of guidance in terms of homelessness. And historically, before COVID-19, we would expect the DOPS 39 to be as low as we possibly can, because we don't want to have people come into our statutory intervention from our perspective. We want to mitigate it. So normally, as you see from the PAM 012, is around about 67%. So what that constitutes is 67% of people who present as homeless, we've mitigated that homelessness provision by alternative means, by supporting them with bonds, by actually leveraging private rental sector, etc. And our key driver was to keep down DOPS 39. That's at 10%, but that all fundamentally changed, Councillor, with the guidance change on the basis that anyone presented who was homeless, we had a statutory duty to care, and that's seen my temporary housing budget move from 78,000 as pre-COVID to 2.7 million. And I think a question was raised in council yesterday around homelessness. We take it very seriously, and without the support of the likes of Wallage, Pobble, we wouldn't be able to support not only our rough sleepers, but the cohort of citizens that come into our service. I haven't got the actual figures in terms of numbers, but I'm happy to offer them up and present them to give you actual numbers. But I can give you some actual tangible, real figures in terms of our current temporary accommodation position, where we have 218 households currently residing in temporary accommodation, which is formulated from that budget of 2.7 million, which equates to about 386 people, of which 137 are children. So we really are at a real difficult position. And when you look at the PAM 012, the national indicator, and the DOPS 39, it doesn't really tell the picture we really need. It just outlines the pressure we're on. So right now, where we are with the legislation, the indicators don't balance or work together with each other. But all I can say is that from a housing perspective, we are actually at a sort of a maximum, and our biggest challenge is residential units to support people and transition them away from our temporary accommodation. So it's a bit of a conundrum, really, both those indicators being red and green, which really we would want, on the flip side, we prefer the PAM 012 being green and the other one being red on the basis of, well, not red, neutral, below our target, to mitigate us having to statutory intervene and actually provide accommodation.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor Williams, does that address your question?
Yes, thanks. If I could ask another question on this subject, and then I'll drop off and put my hand up at the end because my next questions are on the next 2 pages.
Okay.
For the benefit of the newer members to this committee, we've discussed this in previous COSC meetings with regards to the gap when children are 18 and leave care, and then were having to present homeless before they could be provided with accommodation. And you were doing a lot of work at the time to resolve this so that it was seamless, and there would be a process for those children so they could move seamlessly into other accommodation. I just wanted confirmation that this is now in place and that those children are not, well, they become adults then when they're 18, are not included in these figures. Thanks.
From a joint collaborative working position, Councillor Amanda Williams, we're working really closely with social service to mitigate situations like this where a child would transition from 18. And I see Claire's raised her hand, but we do see circumstances where we've got people outside of that bracket, so that transition is smooth, coming into our service, which they will have to present as homeless. So if there's been a break in that period, so we just have to, in terms of the homelessness presentation, that's the fastest process we have in terms of supporting those young people, whether they're traditionally from a corporate parent perspective being looked after from our perspective. I see Claire's raised her hand.
Yes, happy to bring Claire in now.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It is a really important question and critical to our corporate parenting responsibilities. I would advise Scrutiny there is still further work to do in this area between the housing part of the council and social services and wellbeing. It's absolutely counterintuitive, isn't it, that children and young people, because they're young people by this point, are required to present as homeless. We need to do some work around our corporate parenting strategy and the commitment of housing our care experienced children as corporate parents, and how that process works, which is in the best interest of the care leaver. I would say that we've done an initial piece of work supported by a consultancy, Hugh Irwin, which has given us an indication of what we need to do, and we need some accelerated action over the next while to actually deliver on that commitment. One of the matters for consideration will be whether our care leavers, care experienced children for whom we continue to have corporate parenting responsibilities, are given priority in allocation systems. It's possible to do that. But that will be against the backdrop of the needs of everybody else for accommodation. But that will be a choice that will be needed to be made to meet those corporate parenting responsibilities.
Okay, thank you both, Martin and Claire. I'll go to Councillor Martin Hughes now for his question.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to direct my questions, Chair, to the top of page 42. It's on the disabled facilities grants, and basically on the face of it, and indeed being the case, these figures are very alarming, aren't they? The waiting times are sort of close to or exceeding 1 year. We all know people who are in positions of having to wait and endure quite a lot of hardship in the process. There are also consequences which we're aware of. What I'd like to do, if I could just ask 3 quick questions as succinctly as I could. The first one is on the first box, which is right at the top of the page. Could I just ask for clarification that all groups are included in that definition, and that we get some perhaps a better definition of that category to help us to consider those figures. I take it that in the other boxes there's a breakdown for children and young people and also adults, but it'll be good just to see what other groups are included in that first box. Second question then is to ask what stage are we at regarding the move towards the in-house service. There isn't an indication of when it started, where we're at, or what the timetable is. So I think that would be very useful to the committee, I would say. And then thirdly, is the service best fitted in where it is at the moment within the Chief Executive's department, or would there be some scope and merit in moving it, perhaps allying it a bit more closer to social services and well-being? So they are the three questions, Chair, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Martin, would you like to take that?
Yeah, yes, please, Chair. Good. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. In terms of the questions, in terms of the first one, in the PAM 15 is a Welsh indicator, and yes, that covers all persons, cohort of young persons, adults, etc. So that's the Welsh Government indicator, and I do accept when you look at these figures that there's fundamentally, not good enough. Is something we've been working towards in terms of transitioning from the legacy model where we had agents and we were just technically a grant offering service to where we're going to be internalizing. So yeah, that top indicator covers every person. The PSR 09 and PSR 9B is our internal breakdown to give us a view in terms of the differences between adults and children. So I don't know what further breakdown you would require on the PAM 15. If you can offer some advice on that, we can look at sort of breaking out those cohorts further if necessary. But that's if we can take that offline, then I can see if I can add some more value around that. In terms of the second question, it's been quite a difficult journey, if I'm being perfectly honest, and which we've been engaging with Cabinet. We ceased what we call the agent model on the 1st of April 2021, but what that meant at that time, we weren't offering opportunities for external agencies to take on the DFGs, but we were internalising it. But there was a funnel of activity, i.e. previous jobs still in that funnel, which is as a knock-on effect, and we anticipate it's going to take us 2 years or 24 months in terms of to ratchet those legacy jobs down under a new way of process and working. So what does internalisation means is where we're going to take end-to-end control in terms of from referral from social services right through to the surveyor assessing and then implementation with a contractor, which we've never had that control in terms of that basis. So what we've been doing to date is we've done some pre-market engagement with contractors. That happened over the months of December and January 2020 to 21. We've aggregated that data together now, working with our legal and procurement colleagues. We've got a framework that is now going to be signed off from a legal perspective. We're anticipating that will go out to tender early September in terms of to contractors. It's quite a sizable framework, as you can imagine. It's going to be circa £8 million over a 4-year period. But what will give us the contractors that we can build our relationship with, and then we can then dovetail our service into from that perspective, and it'll really make a fundamental difference. Because with DFGs, from this perspective, we do work really closely with social services, because I'm at the point of referrals where an OT has gone in and assessed that person's home and the determination that they need a DFG. So that then gets passed then into what we call the DFG function, and from that we'll process that through. So we work hand in hand in social services, because we can't do anything unless we've had that official referral. So I think in terms of the point 3, we've got that joint working in terms of that facilitation in terms of social services and housing from a delivery, because primarily I'm dealing with the nuts and bolts and delivery of the actual physical tangible DFG, not the actual assessment of in terms of determination, although we do work really closely in terms of that, determining what's best for that system and what their needs are.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I can see the Corporate Director for Social Services has raised her hand. Would you like to come in on this, Claire?
Yeah, only really briefly. I just want to give some assurance to members around OT waiting times. This has been an issue in the past, but a lot of work has happened within the service to ensure it's not an issue now. The longest wait at the moment for an OT assessment, and this is slightly worse than it would usually be due to some sickness in the service, is a referral from the 12th of June. But we had got very close to real time dealing with referrals, and we'll get back to that position once the service is up to full capacity.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, just quickly come back. I think on the first one about the definition, I think just the addition of that it involves all groups would be sufficient. It just gives that clarity. And I think the other points have been well covered by Martin. Thanks very much. What I would support is keeping this under regular review by this committee, given the impact it's having and the ambition to bring everything in-house. And if we could include that on the forward programme, that would be really good.
So the forward work programme's on our agenda for a little bit later today, so I'm sure you can raise that point then, and members will be supportive of that, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Heidi Bennett now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to page 41, if I may, please. It's regarding the PAM 45 and 13, the empty properties. Bringing empty properties back into use has been a key commitment for a while, and it'll help us meet our housing targets and has impact on the LDP and indeed our communities. And I understand the current market situation and the pandemic will have an impact against achieving those targets, but there's no available performance data for 21-22 in the report. So my question is, what are the next steps? Because actually what's described seems to be a continuation of what's already happening. And when will performance data be available? And what more is being done to push this forward to allow more ambitious and achievable targets in the future? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Martin?
Thank you, Councillor Bennett, in terms of your question. So it's quite a difficult one. We have an empty homes property strategy that we work in collaboration with our shared regulatory services. So we have an officer that's focused on empty properties, and in that strategy, our key focus is the top 20 empty properties that are causing significant blight, antisocial behaviour, etc. within that community, and that's where our focus is. That the officer works part-time, so albeit there's only 2 pairs of hands on this, we're currently managing about 150 ongoing cases. And if you review the strategy, it's about working with empty property owners in a positive process, where we're going through a 5-stage process, where if there is no positive movement, we can then take some statutory action. So it's quite a long process, but it's a collaborative process. So and the difficulty around that is, it does take time and investment. So if you look at the sort of number of empty dwellings, PAM 45 it's a bit of a interesting Welsh Government sort of indicator. We've tried to put in the narrative what it actually means about bringing an empty property, and this one specifically, which is quite interesting, the 7 is quite a large number, is about conversion. So you take a single dwelling, you convert it and create an additional dwelling. So if I took a house and split it in half, I'd have an additional dwelling. So there's not many instances where that does happen. You're talking Newport, Cardiff doing on circa around about 30 additional dwellings per annum. Unfortunately, the My Council Info data only relates back to 2019, and they haven't populated since we've had CV to do that cross-check to understand that, PAM. But with PSR04, again, empty properties, as you know, the volatility in the housing market at the moment, in terms of prices going up, etc. It's very difficult for us to manage that process, and then conversely, you'll need to see some narrative in terms of working with empty property owners. The local housing allowance doesn't meet this current sort of high threshold of the private sector rent. So that's something we challenge in Welsh Government on that, in terms of having some leeway in terms of increasing that, because the difficulty we go in terms of reflecting back on our temporary accommodation. But our aspirations is where possible to support empty property owners in terms of bringing their properties back in use, albeit use hopefully for sort of social housing or private rental sector, where we can signpost people and move them to.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Councillor Bennett, are you content with that response, or would you like to have a supplementary question?
Yes, a supplementary, if I may, please. Can you just tell me then how you've mentioned it's a lengthy process, and you've described that it's lengthy. How long do we give property owners to bring their properties into reuse?
Well, it'd probably be better if I could do a written response in terms of that, Councillor Bennett, because I'll engage with the officer from SRS and give you some use cases, but it does take a long time. And then if you get to that compulsory order perspective, that adds additional sort of timelines on that. So what I'll do is I'll come back to the committee with a written response and give you a timeline. We haven't done particularly many compulsory orders. I think one, and that's pre myself, because we've been working with property owners to actually get their properties to position to realisable. We've had some successes where another contractor will take over a property, but then you've got to go through this process of bringing that property up to standard. So I'll get some real use cases for you from the work we've done in our cases, and I can outline then, give you a specific timeline.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much. I've got a few questions. Oh, I don't know where I am here. I don't know why I'm showing up. Hang on a second. There. I've moved rooms for better Wi-Fi. Firstly, going on what you were just saying then about empty properties, can I just ask a question? Are we able to also look at not just houses, but large empty properties? If you look at town, they've got some large buildings there. And as we're now encouraging more people living in our towns, are we allowed to work on those, but bringing those into, or do they have to remain as commercial premises, first of all?
Can I come in, Chair?
Absolutely, Martin.
Specifically, the empty property strategy is focused on residential buildings, Councillor Williams, but we obviously will work with the communities team in terms of opportunities where there could be residential above commercial, and we've seen some successes on that in Maestig above some of the shops there, where we've actually utilised some grant monies to support accommodation above. So I think the remit where we can come in from an empty properties perspective is there's got to be a potential of residential above commercial. We're not delving into converting the commercial units directly, but we will support them, and we've seen some successes working with communities on that in Maestig and other areas. But that's something we consider in opportunities, but that's around different grant referrals which sit in the communities, and that work closely with Gareth and her team in terms of when those opportunities arise.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back?
I don't know if the leader's put his hand up to respond first. Sorry.
You may have, yeah. Councillor David, would you like to respond to that directly?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and there's two very good examples of where we have brought back into use commercial properties that have been empty for a long time, or are bringing them back into use. So there's the Family Value building, a multi-storey, very prominent building in Maestig town centre that we have used Welsh Government funding with the developer to bring back into use. And then a second very good example is the building on Knowlton Street that's currently occupied by Lacachina's, a very successful business that relocated and expanded on the ground floor. But we secured Welsh Government funding again to redevelop the second and third floor for residential. So it's maintaining that vibrancy and footfall of commercial on the ground floor, but making better use of those upper floors in our town centres for residential. And I'm sure we'll continue to look for further opportunities around that in the future, and that's something we're currently looking at, and that's work of the Chief Executive's Directorate and Martin's team alongside the regeneration team within the Communities Directorate. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back in on that?
Not on that. I've got 3 other questions on this whole section, if possible, please.
Sure, please continue.
On that same page, the item working with landlords, and that you're working with landlords, what are you doing with regards to people like Valleys to Coast? Because I'd put a referral directly into them recently, as I was told they had over 100 premises that weren't occupied, that required some work. And my response was simply, yes, we know they require work. You are correct, but there didn't seem to be any urgency or any time scales. So what can we do as a local authority? Because we are now spending and putting residents in hotels when there are all these houses with some of our partners that could be made available? So what are we doing to put the pressure on them? Thanks.
Can I come in, Chair, in terms of the first point? That specifically is not focused around registered social landlords. That's more focused around the private rental sector landlords. And what we've done there is we've got a forum where private landlords can meet with us. We can discuss, look at opportunities, but we've also commissioned some services. It's called Early Doors, to support the tenant and be that sort of critical friend to that landlord in terms of if there's any breakdown in terms of financial, or there's any concerns from the landlord, there could be mental health, etc. So that's specifically around there. In terms of the V2C, yes, they do have a void related issue, or something we've been engaging with them specifically. As you know, we've got 218 households in temporary accommodation now, is costing circa £2.7 million per annum to the authority, and it's something Caris has been working with an underspend, and you saw the capital report in council yesterday in terms of we'll be issuing money to bring back 35 of those properties, and they're one of their long-term voids. So I think it's not a good news story, because these properties shouldn't be void anyway, but from our perspective, it's good to see that 33% of those voids are being back to you without support. So it's that engagement with the registered social landlord. V2C was our biggest in the authority as in terms of from a housing number, circa 5,000. It's key that we have every one of their properties up and viable for a transition from the social housing register. So I'd say the pressure and the support both from cabinet and officers is on V2C, and albeit I cannot respond to their response to you, I think it's quite poor, if I'm being honest. So I think some member sort of pressure would also be helpful from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Councillor Williams, you have another question.
Yes, thanks. It's on page 42. We touched on them before, the grants, and the fact it's taking 282.12 days for, I think, the adults, and 472 days for the children. So I was wondering, because obviously looking at that, everyone looks at that in horror, the amount of days. So could you explain for the public why we have those targets for those for such a long period of time, and why it actually takes that long? Because I'm assuming you're talking to other agencies as well, and there's a lot of work. So I just wanted some clarity on why the targets are so high.
In terms of the so thank you, Chair. In terms of the targets on those, yes, they are high. Councillor Amanda Williams, in terms of those targets, I think aspirationally we're looking at 250 to 210 as being our targets in terms of delivery of the DFGs. That's where we want to go, which will put us in the middle vein in terms of all of the authorities from a comparison perspective. But I don't want to leverage our issues on external pressures, but COVID-19 has been significant, where we had to physically stop doing adaptations, but albeit the clock was still ticking. So even though we've got our performances looking particularly poor now in terms of red and the numbers are high, the issue is the time for a DFG ticks at the point that referrals received, and when we went through a period of there was no access to etc. We had legacy sort of DFGs. This is actually sort of skewing our statistics. We have got some local statistics which now we've got DFGs going through the new process, which it's too early for us to report on, but it's given us some sanity in terms of we going in the right direction. So it's a double whammy of the Brexit stroke COVID in terms of those timelines. But in terms of the children ones, there's a real complexity around that, and we've done a lot of work with Princess of Wales OTs in terms of how we can set expectations and work with them and have engagement early. So we've implemented the process, but we just hamstrung in terms of a lot of the jobs that are in the queue already, and the clock is ticking. And we have seen, once we ceased the agent model, a lot of the complex jobs coming back to the authority as well, which is quite challenging to us as well as an organisation in terms of those figures. Does that give you some clarity in terms of where we are and the impact, Councillor Amanda Williams?
Yes, thanks. I've just got one final question then on this area, and then I'll let other people speak if that's okay.
Sure.
It was on page 33, the performance indicators, CED 28, and it was a little alarming to show we were showing red and the number of engagements in the survey. I just wondered if we have any idea how happy and engaged our workforce are, because obviously they're not engaging in this. Is there a reason why they haven't been engaging in this this survey? And that's the last of my questions there. Thanks.
The monitoring officers come in. Was I defer to Kelly first?
Yeah, I think this would probably be for me rather than for Martin on this one. I think what we found last year, Councillor Williams, is there was a bit of survey fatigue with staff. So they'd been asked to do a number of surveys over a number of years, and that didn't help. So we think that when we put our survey out, there was a bit of fatigue and people were perhaps just fed up with completing surveys. The other issue we had is obviously as people were working from home, people in remote locations, it was getting the survey to them. So whilst we did it electronically, those who wanted a paper survey, we did try to look at alternatives, but then that obviously meant they had to fill it in, return it, and we think that perhaps caused a reduction in the number of people who returned it. What we are doing going forward is looking at staff and public participation in a different way. So we're trying to engage staff in alternative ways, and we're trying to find different ways so that they, you know, it's a bit more meaningful than just ticking a box on a survey. So we are working on that, and we're hoping to develop something different for the next staff survey that goes out.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Amanda, are you happy with that, Councillor Williams?
Yes, great, thanks. It'll just be interesting to see, because obviously the whole working conditions have changed as well as to what the workforce think of working from home or being in the office, those who've had to stay in the office and that. So it would be a really interesting survey to look at the, you know, the makeup of the results.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Richard Granville, please.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that the officers have taken into consideration when they're doing these grants that the cost of everything that's going up, and I hope there won't be a lag or a refreshment of people not getting these grants at the right time due to the cost of increase in products. I just hope that we put enough capital in the budget to make sure we got an overlap so people are not waiting longer than what they are now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to respond to that, an officer? Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Granville. In terms of the question, our DFG budget is just under circa £2 million. And unfortunately, we've never actually managed to focus the whole sum of monies on the DFG itself. We've had to use it for other areas such as enable, sort of fast tracking, hospital to home type thing, and factors such as that. I think, you know, when you look at the cost uplift in terms of raw materials, etc., it is a constraint. There's a level on the top of the DFG of £36,000, but what we're seeing, the average DFG is between £7,500 and £12,500 in terms of low level access shower, swap outs, etc. So I don't think I'm concerned about in terms of the monetary position, and I'd like to be in a good position where I'd be coming back to the council and say, look, I need some more to deliver our DFGs. So I think I'm comfortable with the current budget where it is. It's about getting our processes right and working closely with social services in terms of the needs of the citizens and delivering the DFGs that come through that process.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Granville, are you content?
Yes, Chair, but just one supplementary, if I could. I know that in the audit committee, we've drilled down into this, right? And we've looked at issues and we raised these issues. But I know that we're now working in partnership with other authorities. And can we have a feedback on that over perhaps a 6 months' time so we know exactly if that is working properly?
Thank you, Councillor Granville. The partnership was with NIPA Aberdeen, just providing us the ability for some surveying resources and just to support us in terms of the internalisation. That'll be coming to an end at the latter part of this year, and this is where we've been going on an in-house sort of recruitment drive. Obviously, you know, there's challenges in recruitment, as you've heard earlier in the discussion today, but it's something we focused on and working closely with the corporate landlord in terms of schemes where we can take on apprentices and work them up through the organisation. So, and we're also looking in terms of supporting ourselves from the private sector as well, if we need to bring in resource to from a spot position to deliver us surveying, etc. So we've got a lot, and that's going to be linked in with our framework piece of work as well, sort of Councillor Granville. So yeah, that's our process to date. But you know, I really appreciate the support Neath Patabl has given us to date to ensure we've got a continuity of service.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, Councillor Granville. I'm conscious of the time, and we have 3 other directorates to scrutinise. So does anyone have any further comments on the Chief Executive's Directorate on organisational and cultural change, our workforce, or sickness and absence? Just one thing from me, and that is clearly this is not exclusively for the Chief Executive's Directorate, but there is a high proportion of sickness and absence due to MSD and stress, anxiety and depression, which isn't work-related, albeit it isn't work-related, but it seems to be at a high level across the organisation. So just a quick question about what we're doing to provide employees with the support and signpost them to assistance to ensure that they can return to work as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take this one if that's okay. So we've got a number of services on offer. We've got the Care First service, which is our commissioned counselling service. So employees can access that without going through their line manager. They can do that off their own back if they feel that's appropriate for them. Obviously, if they're off sick, we can also refer them to occupational health, and we can offer more bespoke counselling services. And we've had some recent high profile issues at the moment where we've engaged with very experienced counsellors on specific issues to get them in and to offer support to individuals and to services who may need that. In addition, we've now got a wellbeing officer who's running a number of wellbeing initiatives and rolling them out through the council. So we hope that's something we can further develop. And we're obviously doing that in engagement with staff and with managers to see what is appropriate in the individual circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Without any hands raised, we'll move on to the Social Services and Wellbeing Directorate. I will invite Claire to put anything into context, or if she's content, it may be the case that you're happy to take questions, Claire, so it's entirely up to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy to take questions, as I think the report context is there set out by myself. So happy to take questions. Absolutely.
So are there any questions on the broad narrative of the appendix? This is Appendix B for everyone's information. Otherwise, we'll go to the dashboard. Councillor Amanda Williams has got a question.
Apologies, just trying to turn my computer on. I just wanted to ask how we're doing in relation to recruitment, because a lot of these, the performance is lower than we hoped it could be, or it should be, because of recruitment issues. So how are we doing with recruitment across the many areas? Because a lot of your targets are down simply because of recruitment. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Williams. And I think in my narrative at the start, I talk about the workforce challenges and the workforce issues, and we experience and continue to experience significant challenges in recruitment in key parts of our workforce. So the 2 areas that I would highlight, that the first is care and support workers, care workers working in our domiciliary care services. So just to tell you what we're doing about that, and then I'll come on to the second area. So it was referenced right at the start of the meeting, I think, about the various recruitment events, the marketing that we've been doing, and we've seen some incremental improvements, but not to the level that we would wish to see as a consequence of that. So we're sort of +5 from where we are. There's always a turnover in these services, but we've set ourselves a target of 22 for 22 additional posts, and we're not succeeding in reaching that target yet. So we have reviewed the job description and working through with job evaluation there to ensure that the job description is right to reflect the duties of our care workers. That, as you will know from having approved as a council the market supplement policy, is the first step prior to application of any for any market supplement for this particular workforce, and we will see where that evaluation lands, if that makes any difference, and if necessary we'll make an application under the council's market supplement policy. The other thing that we're doing linked to that is to review the way that rotas work within the service. We still have some split shifts within the service, which isn't attractive for obvious reasons. None of us would want to work split shifts, I'm sure. Why would we expect this workforce to do so? But the pressure on the service in terms of the number of hours care that we need to deliver means that has been a reality. So we need to look at reviewing that, and we're doing some work around how many workers we need in the service to mean that we don't need to operate split shifts to deliver our responsibilities, and that will make it more attractive as well. We've also already in this meeting talked about the impact on workforce of fuel costs. There is some corporate work happening around this. We're obviously part of the corporate body and can't treat this workforce differently to the rest of the workforce without there being equal pay issues. But I certainly am advocating for that work to be accelerated in terms of the impact on this particular part of the workforce. We're looking at things like electric vehicles, fleet cars, where we can to mitigate those costs as well. So that's that part of our workforce. The other area where we are significantly challenged is around children's social workers, in particular teams. So we've got our IAA team, our safeguarding localities, particularly where we are challenged. We were the first part of the council to progress to make a market supplement application, which was successful around those particular teams. And we did that having undertaken a review of job descriptions, and that review having resulted in an increased grade for the most experienced social workers within those teams. So and not just those teams, across adults and children's social care. So that was successful, and then the market supplement application was successful. We're also doing a lot of work around a workforce charter, which addresses the non-financial areas that support workers, supportive management, supervision, offer very high quality opportunities to develop your career. Critically for us, low caseloads, because that's really important to people having the time to do the work and to do the work to the quality that needs to be done. However, despite all of that, we stubbornly see significant levels of vacancies within those teams. We are bridging the gap in the short term, as members will know, through strategically engaging an agency workforce. And that's important because if you do it ad hoc and one agency worker at a time, that there can be issues with the quality of agency workforce and the continuity of that workforce. So we've got strategic engagements across those teams in terms of agency workforce, and we're also progressing international recruitment as well. So we've got an arrangement that we've procured with an organisation to support international recruitment of social workers, and we've got 8 workers who are coming forward to be interviewed as part of that. All of those things are the short and medium term. In the long term, what we've done is to significantly increase the number of secondees onto the social work course, and from this year onwards, from September onwards, we've got both social work trainees and secondees coming onto the course. It's a really challenging area, not just for us, for the whole of Wales and indeed the UK, but as members will appreciate, there's a specific Bridgend context at the moment. The positive, I would say, is that in a recent survey undertaken by Care Inspectorate Wales as part of their inspection of us, we've seen that 93% of our workers in children's social care feel supported to do that job. And that's something that when we're marketing and we're promoting coming to work in Bridgend against all the other media coverage that we're getting, that we need to promote, and I would ask members to promote as well. So sorry for the length of answer, but it's a really important area for us to deliver against all of the other priorities.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Williams, would you like a supplementary question?
I've just got one other quick question, which links into that, and the sickness absence on the report. It was quite high last 2 quarters. I'm assuming it's also because of COVID and the vulnerability of the number of people that our staff are working with. So obviously they need to safeguard those. Are we seeing any improvement in the sickness absence now? Because obviously that will also impact if we've got staff but they're off sick and we're currently struggling to recruit as well. Thanks.
Yeah, we are seeing significant issues in terms of sickness, particularly in our care and support at home services. One of the things I would advise members is that our workforce is really tired. You know, the length of the you know, I suppose challenges that we've been facing right across the whole service, and you know, throughout this you know, the pandemic and the lockdowns, you know, these workers have continued to deliver face-to-face services right throughout in the most extreme of pressures, most recently the extreme heat that we've been experiencing, and we've got a workforce that, you know, to highlight the issues highlighted in one of the previous questions, the two biggest areas for us are musculoskeletal. We've got obviously waiting times for NHS treatments which impact there, and where manual handling is an issue in work. You can't work if you've got a musculoskeletal issue. We do of course look at redeployment, but that often can be very, very challenging for this workforce. And then work-related and non-work related stress. So we are working with colleagues in HR, in addition to what Kelly said earlier about that corporate-wide support and that targeted support where indicated. We've also got very bespoke wellbeing support going into teams through our social care workforce development team, and you know, that we can see that impacts, and we can see that impacts on workforce wellbeing, but it continues to be a real challenge, particularly in those 2 areas that I highlighted.
Thank you very much, Claire. Unless you've got anything else to add, Councillor Williams, we'll bring in Councillor Freya-Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I wondered if we had any updated literature to share for the new members to highlight the foster carers and to encourage more foster workers so that we can help with that aspect of things. But also on page 55, with the red block there on the percentage of assessments completed for children with statutory times within the timescales, statutory timescales. That touches on what Councillor Williams asked earlier about MASHers, and I just wondered, does the answer earlier mean that this should improve, and if so, how are we going to do that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for those 2 questions. Just very quickly, yes, we'll get some literature for all members out to share around promoting our foster carer recruitment, really important area as we know. The second question, yes, we will see performance measures, particularly as we go into Q2, improve across the range of children's statutory indicators. We saw a significant deterioration in performance in children's social care at the start of Q4 of the last year. We've been managing some of those issues through a critical incident in respect of IAA to ensure that there is very high level, timely and focused support to oversee those improvements. Those improvements are evident, and we'll see those coming through in the performance measures in subsequent quarters.
Thank you, that answers that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the Social Services and Wellbeing Directorate? There's only one from me, Claire, and this applies to the Education Directorate as well, and it's on, sorry, page 57. It's related to safeguarding e-learning, and it seems to be, you know, while it's 77% and I think 72% in the Education Directorate, clearly this seems relatively low, really, because obviously you'd expect social service and education to be very high, almost 100%. You know, so what are we doing to tackle, you know, a quarter of our staff not undertaking these modules?
I think a really important question, and as corporate director with responsibility for corporate safeguarding, I was the person who pushed for this indicator to be included in all directorate dashboards, because if you've got visibility, then that's one of the ways we're going to tackle and get that level up. I would say, because by definition, people who work in my directorate have training in safeguarding. Sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to get them to undertake the corporate e-learning, because they would say, well, I'm already a very skilled and experienced social worker. Why do I need to do this particular aspect of learning? But as we know, the corporate module addresses corporate safeguarding, safe recruitment practices, etc., as everybody knows who's been on these calls. So therefore, it is really important they undertake that training. I think the place to address it, A, is by measuring it, and therefore, you know, that visibility and competition between directorates and competitions between parts of directorates is important, and it needs to be addressed in supervision and appraisal with individuals, and also be part of induction for those who are new starters to the council, so they do it straight away.
Thank you very much, Claire. That's great. Does anyone have anything else on the social services and wellbeing directorate? I can't see any hands, so thank you very much, Claire. We'll now move to the next directorate, which is education, I believe. I'll just try and pull it up myself. Does anyone have, or I'll invite Lindsay actually to, in the same way as I did Claire, to provide any context if he wishes to do so, but if not, you'd probably be happy to take questions, Lindsay, are you?
Absolutely, Chair, I'm in your hands. I'm more than happy providing context, going straight to questions.
Okay, so if everyone's content with the narrative which Lindsay's provided, I'm conscious that we're 3 hours into the meeting, so we'll go straight to questions. And has anyone got anything to raise within the Education Directorate? Heidi Bennett, please. Councillor Heidi Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Just noting on the report that we've got blue status against most of the commitments, and yet we don't have KPI data to back that up. So I'm wondering, when will we get to that point of having some KPI data that assures us that we're on track? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Through you, Chair. Yeah, it's a really good point. I'll give you some context here, and it's a timely question. On the 27th of June this year, the Welsh Government, and I'll get this right because it's quite a mouthful, Chair, so let me get the exact words, published the Evaluation, Improvement and Accountability Framework. Now that provides then the framework for KPIs and public assessment measures to be set in respect of education. Members will be aware up until 2 years ago, there was a suite of pupil attainment data that we could use to compare and contrast, not just individual schools, but local authorities across Wales. That's no longer in existence. And in line with some of the new changes we've had with curriculum reform and ALN reform, the Welsh Government has published this new model for accountability. Now, I know a lot of you are school governors, so hopefully by now, or certainly in September, you will have information on this particular framework. And it requires a number of things from schools. And on that basis, then we will use this data to provide you with much clearer data sets. So, for example, in the new model, you will be aware from some of the recent press that school categorisation is not being used going forward. However, the school, and it depends from school to school which one you're in, either your school improvement plan or your school development plan is now published, and a summary of it will be published, and your improvement partner that we contract from Central South Consortium will be working with you to provide an update to governing bodies at the start and the end of the year. So Councillor Bennett's question is a really important one, because we'll use that information then to benchmark performance on an individual and local authority level, and then provide the KPIs on the basis of that benchmark. So clearly, as soon as we see the first raft of these school improvement plans, school development plans coming in, on that basis, then we'll modify our targets to make sure we provide you with those KPIs.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Councillor Bennett, for raising that. That was also on my list. Would you like a supplementary question at all?
No, just thank you. That was very comprehensive.
Does anyone else have anything on the Education Directorate? The only thing that I would say is that obviously Lindsay and I, as chair of Scrutiny Committee 1, which covers education, have worked very closely together in putting together our forward work programme for the following year, and we pick up some of the challenges within the Directorate in our forward work programmes, such as the inflationary pressures and home to school transport, the Welsh Education Strategic program, is it, Lindsay, or plan?
Plan, yeah.
Plan, yeah, okay. And a number of other items which are within this dashboard. So if you're on Scrutiny Committee 1, you'll be seeing that, and obviously it'll be up to the other scrutiny committees how they deal with their forward work programmes, which will be fed into this overall corporate overview and scrutiny committee when they've decided upon them. So unless there are any further questions, Lindsay's had an easy time compared to others, and we will move on to the Communities Directorate and Appendix D. Thank you, Lindsay. We move now to Janine's Directorate, Communities Directorate. Similarly, Janine, would you like to provide any context to your dashboard, or would you prefer me to just go to members' questions?
Well, Chair, if I may provide a 30-second bit of context, I think what's important is something that Cara said at the start of our session, is this is linked to the corporate plan, and this is year 3 of a 3-year plan. And we are moving next year into a brand new plan. So I agree with some of the comments that were made earlier. There are a significant number of very, very important initiatives that are not reflected as they should. For instance, the whole 2030 decarbonisation piece and our efforts around that. I mean, 3 years ago, we didn't have that mandate. So what is very clear is moving forward into the new corporate plan, we will probably see more initiatives being brought forward that we haven't seen previously. So just to make that comment, Chair, that yes, there are a number of the projects we would have liked to see, but they will be in the next iteration.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got Councillor Amanda Williams who would like to come in.
Thanks. I'm not going to bombard you with lots of questions on this because I asked quite a few earlier. I've just got one question on the sickness levels. They seem to be going up, and I know that some of your teams have been cut to the bare bones. Yeah. So how are you coping when you've got a team of 1 that then could potentially become a none, or a team of 2 that becomes a team of 1? How are you coping with all of these sickness absence when you haven't got the staff there in the first place? Thanks.
Okay, Janine.
Well, thank you, Councillor Williams. It is appreciated that you understand the situation we're in. Well, how do we cope? We do the best we can, to be truthful. A lot of our sickness is musculoskeletal, which I wouldn't say is expected, but we have an awful lot of people who are frontline services doing manual handling, doing heavy jobs. So it's not expected, but it's not unusual. But the one thing that does concern me, and this is not just in the Communities Directorate, it's across all directorates, is the stress levels, people going off for stress-related issues. Now, some of them are saying they're not work-related, and some are. We've got about 17% non-work-related, and I think a lot of that is via COVID, cost of living, etc. But we're up to nearly 10% of stress-related in work. The truth of the matter is staff wellbeing is of huge concern to us currently. Not just are we a very lean directorate, or we're a very lean council, to be fair, but that when you do have people who are not well, the responsibilities shouldn't be picked up by other officers, but they are. Case in point, really, the members' referral piece, which we've discussed and we will continue to have discussions with. I'm very uncomfortable with where we are with communities. We have an unprecedented amount of referrals and very few staff specifically dedicated to members' referrals, and we're trying to amend that position to make that position better. But the truth of the matter is if we know people are off on long-term sick, we do try and bring in agency people to cover, to take some of the stress off. But in essence, short-term sickness absences are just either covered by the existing team, or I'm afraid, because we're not resourced as well as we want, the work sits there until that member of staff is back into post. But I don't think that's any different to how we deal with it across other parts of Bridgend Council. We are very, very lean and generally do the best we can. But I think the one thing that does concern me is that staff are resilient. And and they have worked extremely hard through COVID. And what we've said to them is, look, we will get back to a normal position of business as usual. I don't think there's such a position anymore. I think this extreme level of pressure and workload is becoming the norm. And so well-being for our staff is critical now to ensure that we have a healthy staff, not just physically but mentally as well. That's critical for us. So I hope that probably hasn't answered very well, but it's an honest appraisal of where we are in the Communities Directorate.
Okay, thank you, Janine. I understand the Cabinet Member for Communities, Councillor John Spanzik, would like to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Janine said there, maybe it's more appropriate for me to say it than Janine, on the wellbeing of staff and the sickness. And it has been touched on previously, not this meeting. There's a lot of new members, but all members, the response and the way some members are responding to officers and asking of things to officers is on occasions inappropriate and becoming almost a point of harassment, and it needs to be calmed down. Members represent the constituents and they want things done quickly and overnight, but things are not going to happen quickly as you'd like to happen. But it is having a negative effect on officers. In the Communities Directorate, the major number of referrals come into that directorate, the majority of 80–90%. But there needs to be all members think twice before they start asking for some of the things they're asking for, and the way they respond in requests if the answer is not what they wanted to be. So I think, and that is and will long term have it is having an effect now on officers, and there's a real danger there that we need to stop and think about our actions as members before we expect miracles from officers, especially within the Communities Directorate. That goes across the council, but it's the Communities Directorate is where the people think the magic wand lies to fix the problems out there in our streets, but there's not one.
I think the chair's frozen, is he?
What's happened?
Councillor Bletcher, do you want to take the chair temporarily until we can get Councillor Williams back?
Absolutely, yes, not a problem. Just following on from Councillor John Spanswick there then, please. Can I bring Councillor Amanda Williams in, please?
Thanks very much. I just wanted to come back on what Janine was saying, and I'll touch on what Councillor Spanswick said. Unfortunately for Communities Directorate, that's what the whole of the community, the most residents see. I can see that's why I think the number of referrals that come in are so high, because they don't see some of the things that go on in social services or anything like that. Everyone sees the roads, they see the grass, they see everything. So I think you're always going to get far more referrals than any other directorate, and you've always been the ones who take the cut every year, year on year. So you know, but firstly, I want to know if you think you're getting the support that you need as a directorate, because I've been here now, this is my 6th year. I know that the cuts come across communities, and yet you have an awful lot of work to do. Are you getting this support to be able to do your job, all of your staff? And obviously we touched on the wellbeing and that. Are they getting that support for the wellbeing? And I think it's very difficult, because I'll give an example of how frustrated people are. I yesterday had several emails in from a resident complaining, saying I hadn't done anything on a referral in communities because I hadn't given them responses. And it's very difficult because they can't see the bigger picture. So as members, sometimes we do get frustrated because we are being hijacked too, and we're being shouted at thinking we're ignoring people, and we're not. But sometimes people don't realise that there will be delays, and there are delays, and the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't know where you lost me then. Sorry, I had technical difficulties, but I just was responding to Councillor Spanswick and saying that I think all directorates need to manage members' expectations. So, for example, I've had to chase referrals about 8 times, you know, and that is not a good use of either officers' times or my time. So if I were to provide my residents with an expectation that you will get a response in due course, but it may take up to 2 or 3 months to get a response from this particular service area because of the significant pressure that they're under, they would probably understand. But we are all being told that we're going to get a response within 10 working days, which we're not, in the vast majority of cases, we're not getting that. So, you know, Councillor Spanswick is absolutely right. There's frustration as far as members are concerned, and I've expressed frustration, I know that, with officers, and potentially my attitude could have improved. So I will acknowledge that in future when dealing with officers appropriately. But you know, members' expectations and constituents' expectations need to be managed because they want immediate results. They're chasing us on the front line. Therefore, we cascade that to officers. So, but I do understand the service pressures which you're all under. Okay, so
Chair, do you mind if I just come back on
yeah.
that? We've had a very useful session with group leaders last week, I think it was, to set up. We've got a 4-point action plan for members' referrals, and maybe we could look at rolling that out further to all members for them to understand the current situation. Just give me 2 seconds just to give you a bit of context. Last year, the Communities Directorate received 3,045 referrals. That was up 1,000 on the year before, so 3,045 referrals. This year, in 10 weeks since the election, we've had 783 referrals and 1,945 reported incidents. So we've had 2,700 in 10 weeks. Last year, we had 3,000 all year. Now, of course, it's a new election, new electorate, and absolutely new members. And my frustration is a member referral is your right and you want to get the information to the electorate. So there's frustration on both sides that we can't fulfill our obligation and neither can you. But what I'm saying is that it is unprecedented. It's gone up by 70%. And we were having difficulties at 3,000, but we're now reaching 3,000 in 3 months. If this continues, we could be at 12,000 if the rate of exponential. So what we have is a 4-point plan. The first bit of the plan is to get more dedicated resources into the Communities Directorate, and we're going to get 3 more resources sitting in the Directorate, working with teams in highways, in corporate landlord and in parks and leisure, because that's the main concern. The second bit is the system as it stands has got some issues for both members and for ourselves. There are system fixes that we need to do. The third bit of it is we need to get much better information out there on the website. And as you said, Councillor Williams, to manage expectations of the public. If, for instance, the grass is cut every 5 weeks, what we could do is put the grass cutting schedule on the web. So you know, why isn't my grass cut? Let's see, oh, it's due next week, or it's due in 2 weeks, etc. Just more available information might help. And the last point, the 4th point of the plan, is definitely far more member training and support, because half of our council now are brand new members, and unfortunately they're not using the system as it's intended. So people are putting referrals in where they should be reported, they put in things in that don't belong to the council, and there's an awful lot of issues. So a lot of these 2,700, some of my team are telling me are not council functions, have been reported in the wrong way. So between the 4-point plan, the staff, the system, more information on the web, and us doing more member training, we are hoping that pincer movement, but working hand in hand with members, will improve this system. Now, it's not going to be a quick fix because we've got a big backlog, but we're hoping if we can get those 4 points done, and we can work with you and get some more information out there, I'd like to think that we can have a much more coherent, responsive system. And you are right about 10 days. There is no chance at the moment we could get anywhere near, I'm afraid, a 10-day response. And I hate to say that, but that's the truth of the matter. Now, out of the 783 we've had, we've responded to 266. So we've got 500 odd outstanding. Now, 266 in 10 weeks is a pretty heavy load, considering we've got a very lean team. So we are working flat out to get those responses through. But that 4-point plan is what we need to fix all the different parts of the system, and I'm working with officers, and we had a conversation with group leaders. But I think what might be helpful if we could hold a member session and explain about all of this to the wider council membership, because I want to fix it. I could do amazing things everywhere in the borough and spend millions on amazing things, but if I can't respond to referrals, I might as well pack up, because that's what our reputation as the Directorate and the council sits on, and so it's critical we improve it. So apologies for that, I've taken far too much time, but I thought it was worth you just hearing there's an action plan in place to fix it. So.
Great, I appreciate your efforts to resolve the situation, Janine, and thank you for the context and explanation. Does any other member have a question for Janine's Directorate, Communities Directorate? No? On that basis?
Yes, Chair, I got my hand up. I did have it up for a while, but Janine was in full flow, and I didn't want to didn't want to stop her because she was in full flow going
no
at
problem. No problem, Councillor Granville. I'll bring you in now.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say, as a borough councillor and a community councillor, we try to work as a community council closely with Bridgend, and we've asked on numerous occasions, Janine, for the grass cutting schedules, because we employ a company as well to make up the loss that we are not cutting now. And we are constantly told on numerous occasions, no, you can't have it because circumstances could change our end. That's the council's end, right? For whatever reasons, right? And we can't give it to you. Well, that's not good enough, right? Secondly, you're quite right. It's not good enough that we're not getting referrals, but I can understand that with the leanness of the department, right? So can I make a suggestion to you? If it's a complex issue, right? Can't you put a holding letter out to members saying, we have to formally investigate this further, right? I apologise for the inconvenience, right? But when we get the answer, we will give it to you. That will give you a bit more time to get realistically the answers that members want. And it's not such a hardship for your department then a struggle to catch up with things. Because I think if we do things like that and we tell members what we're doing, then they'll come along with you. But if you don't tell members, they won't come along with you. That's all I wanted to say to you. I'm trying to help Janine, your Chair.
Absolutely spot on, Councillor Granville. I think when you put your inquiry in and it goes into a black hole, there's nothing worse. At least if you had an acknowledgement, and that's what we're trying to work on, getting you an acknowledgement, I think that would make the world of difference. And the second thing, any information that would ease some of these inquiries about grass cutting, or I can't even think of any other examples now, but I want to try and get that on the web, or to get the information out there so that residents can look and see, and they're not bothering you as members with some of these, and dare I say, lower level inquiries, because, you know, genuinely they are lower level. They're important to the residents, very important. But if we can get rid of those in an easy way, it gives us the time to respond to the complex. So absolutely spot on, Councillor Granville, and that's what we, you know, what we're really going to try and do.
And can I suggest, Chair, just come back, because I think it's another important point, that we keep community councils up to date on what we're doing. So could we perhaps put not a bulletin out to community councils on where we are doing things, so to keep them in the loop, so they're not writing to you as well, because they probably write a lot of letters. I know our community council does, right, to your Directorate specifically, right? And then we're waiting for answers. We get frustrated because we're waiting month on month, right? And then members get frustrated. So I think if we keep the community council in a loop as well, then them kind of things will ease out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We were going to suggest coming to the forum, the TSCC forum, if that would assist it in the autumn, to try and, by then I'd like to think I would have some of these things implemented. But whether we could come and keep, yeah, you're right. Communication's key, isn't it? Here is key, and as well, this is a joint endeavour. We're only going to resolve this if we work together on it, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Granville.
Janine, and I'm behind you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Granville. Thank you very much, Janine. I'm going to make some progress now and end this item. Thank you very much to the invitees. If there are no further questions, the invitees may leave the meeting unless they wish to stay for the rest of the meeting or are involved in the rest. We are now going to move members to item 5 on the agenda, and that is the nomination to the Public Service Board Scrutiny Panel. I'll ask the Scrutiny Officer to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to request the committee to nominate one further member to sit on the Public Service Board Scrutiny Panel, in addition to Councillor Freya Bledsoe and Councillor Simon Griffiths, who were nominated at the previous meeting of this committee, which was held on the 30th of June 2022. By way of background, from the 1st of April 2016, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 introduced statutory public services boards across each local authority area in Wales and statutory scrutiny of the PSB. The authority designated a PSB scrutiny panel, which sits under the remit of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee for this purpose. The panel will hold up to 2 meetings a year and make its recommendations to corporate for approval before reporting to the Public Service Board. And now I'll hand back to you, Chair, for to receive the nominations.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Councillor Martin Hughes.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to nominate Councillor Graham Walter.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hughes and Councillor Granville. Congratulations, Councillor Walter, unless there are further nominees. I can't see any hands, so congratulations, Councillor Walter, on your appointment.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I will now move to item 6 on the agenda, and that's consideration of the forward work programme. I will now ask the Scrutiny Officer to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's constitution requires the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to develop and implement a forward work programme from the committee. At the last meeting of this committee, members received the draft report on the forward work programme, which included the topics that were set out in the draft, and approved the draft forward work programme, subject to consideration of any potential topics that may be proposed following the scrutiny of the Council performance report today. The work programme is attached as Appendix A for the committee's consideration, and we also have a recommendations monitoring action sheet to track responses to the committee's recommendations from last time. As soon as we receive those, we will circulate them round, and I'll hand back to you, Chair, for any questions or comments on the work programme, and I'm sure you've got some proposals as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Meryl. Do I have any comments on the forward work programme before I make my own suggestions? See any hands? I think, Councillor Hughes, you mentioned that we would like to look at the disability facilities grants in more detail, didn't you? Is that something which you'd like to suggest that we keep on our agenda and possibly have a separate item on it so that we can do a deep dive into the issues which are affecting that particular service area?
Yes, thanks for picking that one up, Chair, if you would. Thank you.
Is everyone in agreement that that's put on the forward work programme, and we can liaise with the Chief Executive because this particular service area sits in his directorate for an appropriate time whereby he can present a report to the committee?
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. The only other things that I have picked up are that, if I can find it, sorry, there's so many things open here. Of course, everyone will be aware that the cost of living payment scheme has been delivered by Bridgend County Borough Council on behalf of central government, and there have been a number of issues. No doubt all councillors would have been bombarded by constituents with relation to the operational delivery of this particular scheme. So I am suggesting that at an appropriate time in the future, when it has been concluded, that the organisation could potentially learn some lessons from how this scheme was delivered. This is not in any way a party political point, but simply an organisational point in which we can learn lessons for delivering future schemes, which inevitably we will be asked to do on behalf of central government. So would that be something which members would support?
Yes.
I would agree with that as well, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Is everyone in agreement?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair,
thank
can
you.
I just ask a question on that, please?
Certainly.
That was something perhaps I was going to ask the scrutiny, the audit committee to have a look at. I don't know how we're going to get around this. So I don't want two different things within the council to look at it, because it's a waste of time and energy for officers and members. So I think perhaps we should have. I'll ask. We've got a meeting this next week. I'll ask in there. Perhaps we should leave it to this committee to do.
Sorry. I was just gonna come in, Chair, and say
sorry, Meryl.
Sorry, I was just going to say, perhaps if you're waiting until the end, near the end of the scheme and looking back at it, it may be more appropriate for the Governance and Audit Committee to look at it, as long as somebody is picking it up, because it would be sort of too late for input into the delivery of the scheme now from Scrutiny, if you're to leave it to the end. So I don't know what you feel about that, Chair, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm happy with either committee to look at it. I agree with Councillor Granville that we don't want to duplicate effort. That would be ridiculous. But I do still think that the delivery of the scheme, not just the finances relating to it, but the delivery of the scheme ought to be looked at. So I guess we need to seek guidance on where it ought to sit, whether it be a matter of financial affairs, which would inevitably sit with the audit committee, on which Councillor Granville and I sit on that committee, so we can certainly raise that with them, or whether it's an organisational matter whereby it would sit with corporate overview and scrutiny committee. So perhaps we can seek guidance on it and we can review it on a future occasion, but I still think we can learn lessons from the delivery of the scheme, because many of our constituents have been very frustrated with how it's been delivered to date, as I'm sure all members of all political persuasions would agree. So perhaps we can leave that for now, but we'll pick it up at a future date, if that's okay, after seeking guidance from audit colleagues. The only other thing that I mentioned, Meryl, remind me, was homelessness, wasn't it? It's a strategic priority, and we learned today that there are going to be significant pressures on the this particular service area in the future. I'm just asking whether members would agree with potentially putting this on the agenda, so, and combining it with housing in general. So it could be homelessness, housing, empty properties, etc., in a grouped report, which could come to us because it is such a corporate risk for the local authority. I'm happy to take members' views on it, though. Councillor Amanda Williams.
I totally agree. Can we include in that about the care leavers, because there is that gap, because there is apparently ongoing work between the two directorates to look at that gap when children become 18 and leave care. They did say that there are occasions where they have to present homeless before being given somewhere to live. So that's a significant concern, because these are extremely vulnerable people that we need to be looking after. Even if they've just turned 18, we still have a responsibility to them. So I would agree. Plus also in December, the law's changing, isn't it, with regards to landlords. So a lot of people, I think it's increasing now, the number of landlords who are taking their properties back now before the law changes. So I think the numbers will increase as well.
I'm in agreement with that, if everyone else is okay with that.
Certainly, Chair, take that one back.
Is everyone in agreement?
Yes, agreed. I think it's quite an important one, that.
Thank you, Councillor Bledsoe. I don't see any disagreement. Thank you very much, everybody. With regards to the current proposed forward work programme, is there anything anyone wishes to raise? I think everything looks satisfactory to me. Oh, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just going to come in and say that throughout the discussions today, workforce has been a real issue across all of the directorates, and that's really impacting on performance. So I'm wondering if there's something we should be doing around looking at that in the forward work plan and keeping an eye on that, monitoring that position, because it does have an impact on us as members as well. Thank you.
Well, Meryl, would you like to comment on that, or I'm happy to comment?
Chair, I think it's a valid point. I think also to remember that members will have another report like this one in a few months to give a watching brief over these things. But also, I think what will be more helpful is the officers spoke earlier about the change towards self-assessment, and you and I have spoken about it, and the opportunity for members to feed into the self-assessment and the new corporate plan, and make sure some of that is caught in the new plan and monitored from there forward. So I think there's opportunities on the horizon to look at those things. But if you wish to have a separate item on the work programme, that's okay too. But just
given the corporate risk which Councillor Bennett has just raised, and I think it is across the whole of the organisation, workforce, recruitment, retention, all of those issues probably ought to be discussed at an early date. But you are absolutely right, and I mentioned it earlier, didn't I, Meryl, and so did you, that we are reverting to a self-assessment, or we're moving towards a self-assessment process rather than the current dashboards which we currently monitor performance, as Councillor Griffiths picked up earlier on. So until such time as we receive that initial report, as you mentioned, we're not going to do any deep dives into those particular issues, but the three different areas which we've identified, the disability facilities grant, the homelessness housing, and what was the another thing you added onto that, Councillor Williams?
Care leavers.
Care leavers, yeah, that's the other one, and then the third one yeah, exactly. We can combine that into one item on that, and then the third item is the workforce retention and recruitment issues which are affecting the organisation. And I think that would provide us with a balanced forward work programme if everyone's in agreement. Unless there's any dissent or any other ideas which members would like to put forward.
No, I think that's a good balance, that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's any other
we take those forward, Chair. Thank you.
Issues, I think, Meryl, you and your team can take that forward. On that basis, I'll move to item 7 on the agenda. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. So I will close this meeting and thank everyone for their diligent attendance for what has been a lengthy meeting at 13:07. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.